this showcase is really has its origins in an initiative that Shirley put forward to pick up some ideas about integrating research and teaching. It came out of something that I was involved with. And she has put her support behind it, and it's largely due to her that we're happy that we're here today. And Attila, as I said, also is very positive about it, because everybody sees the value of linking teaching and research. It's changing it from seeing the value to actually doing something about it and making it mainstream. It's not that it doesn't happen in pockets. How do we make it happen everywhere? Anyway, Shirley has been here for not quite as long as I have, but I've been involved with work with Shirley and vice versa for probably close on 20 years. And I'd like to introduce Shirley to talk about her perspective on linking teaching and research and its benefits to UTS. Thanks, Shirley.
Thanks very much, Les. And also thank you for persevering and trying to find a time when both Attila and I could be together. It's taken, I think it's about 4 months to actually get a time. We've finally got 1.5 hour when we can actually be together. So in my role as DVC, Teaching, Learning and Equity, as well as dealing with an enormous number of day-to-day issues, I think one of my most major roles is to be always scanning what's going on in higher education, not only in Australia but around the world. And scanning in terms of what's happening right now, but trying to predict the future. And it's been so important for us to be doing that at a time when we're spending $1 billion on our campus. Because we don't want to build a campus designed for yesterday's approaches to learning. We had to be sure that we're building as future-proof a campus as we possibly could. And so I just wanted to talk a bit about what I see are the challenges in thinking about the future. And I just want to start out with a photograph that I took on Bondi Beach one summer's day. It was a beautiful Sydney summer day, thousands of people on the beach, and suddenly this storm cloud came over. And people panicked, ran off the beach, went back to their homes. I stayed around to take photographs of the storm cloud, and actually nothing happened. It passed over, and then some people came back out. So my question is this analogous to what's going on now? Are we seeing this storm cloud coming and it's going to pass over and nothing's going to happen, or is there going to be a thunderstorm? And the elements that I see of the storm cloud are things like let's narrow the screen. Anyway, that's meant to be cost of higher education. There's an increasing cost involved in higher education. And at the same time, there's a decrease in government funding. And only today, I got up at 6 o'clock to see the news that Christopher Pyne is going to abolish student amenities fees, is going to put caps back on places, is going to cut out the widening access targets that we've had, and a lot of funding. So a lot of the wonderful support services that we've been able to afford because of this government funding are going to disappear very quickly. But we've been able to show that those support services are really useful and really making an enormous difference to our students' lives. So if we want to continue those, what are we going to cut in order to be able to afford to do that? There are also starting to be lots of questions around the world about whether the investment that students make is worth it for them. I'll show you a slide about that. And there's also some early signs of the beginning of disaggregation of higher education. I remember about 15 years ago, there was a Vice-Chancellor saying, why should taxpayers fund club beds? Someone else said, well, if you look around universities now, you would start to think that they're spending all their money on fertiliser. So we see these expansive green lawns. So this is a quote from Larry Summers, who was the president of Harvard, in talking about the way things change. So I've been involved, learning technologies has been my discipline area for about 25 years. And I've been hearing predictions of the demise of universities and the demise of teachers for a long time, and nothing has ever really changed all that much. This is quite interesting, I think. Things take longer to happen than you think they will, and then they actually happen faster than you think that they might. So are we at that point where things are going to start happening faster? And I'll give you my own view about that towards the end. I just wanted to mention this report that came out from the Grattan Institute last year, and it's a right-wing tank, but the report, and I'm sure that Tony Abbott has already memorised its contents, is complaining about the fact that taxpayers currently fund higher education to the tune of $7 billion a year. And the argument that they were making is that the beneficiaries of that higher education are largely those who receive private benefit. So graduates earn higher salaries, and that there is less than half of that money goes towards public benefit. So the argument they were putting forward is that taxpayers should only be funding or supporting those courses where there is a demonstrated public benefit. Now, I think on the one hand you could argue that having educated citizens is an enormous public benefit, but I suspect this government may not see it that way. They may see engineers, teachers, nurses, doctors as being the public benefit. They may, I don't know. But that's one of the challenges that we have. Ernst & Young put out a report last year saying that there's only 3 ways that universities are going to survive. We have to, if we want to keep our status quo, then we have to streamline our operations. So that's that whole decreasing cost issue. How are we going to streamline our operations? The second one is really about disaggregation. Really focus on becoming a niche dominator. Stop trying to be the Club Med for everybody. Not that we're really a Club Med, but just focus on one particular area and stick with this. And the third one, which I hope is the path that we're going, is becoming a transformer. It's really redefine what it means to have an education at UTS. Not that we're going to outsource much of our operations, but what we're really doing is transforming the experience that students have. Now, the third area that I was talking about was the questions that are being asked about whether the investment in higher education is worth it. And this is a graph that comes out of the US, but it's probably just as applicable, will be in Australia. So this is the I remember in the very early days of computers going to a university in Sydney, I won't say which one, and the then Vice Chancellor had been given a presentation, and she stood in front of the screen and picked up the mouse and was pointing the mouse and trying to get that to point and do something on the screen. No one had the heart to tell her it wasn't working. Anyway, so there is the cost of higher education in the US going up, and here's the average salaries going down. So once that gets wider and wider, students do start to ask the question about whether the investment in a course is worth it. Now, the US is very different. Attila and I had this conversation this week, I think, about there's a lot of community colleges and other institutions that just don't do research at all in the US, and there are some questions being asked about those. But when people see these kinds of graphs, they do start to wonder about whether the investment is worth it. Now, all of this causes us to think about what it is that we should be teaching. And if we look at the Graduate Outlook survey from 2012, this is a survey of employers As you know, one of our KPIs at UTS is about our graduate workplace success. And it used to be what defined UTS, that our students had much higher levels of employment than those from other universities. And in fact, if you remember when we came to the top of the Learning and Teaching Performance Fund a few years ago, that was primarily because we had such high graduate employment rates. And over time, that has been dropping. And we can attribute part of it to the GFC. But if we look at this graph, so this is the graduate intake in different organisations, there's been a significant increase in the percentage of employers who are not recruiting any graduates at all, and a decline in the number of employers who are recruiting more than 20. But the interesting thing is, what are the most important selection criteria when they are recruiting graduates? Students always think, and some teachers always think, it's about content. Because when we try to talk to them about different approaches to teaching and learning, they will always come back and say, but we have to get through all the content. But if you look at what's important, interpersonal and communication skills. Number one, it has been for 4 years. Passion, knowledge of the industry, drive, commitment, attitude. Number two, consistently. Critical reasoning, analytical, problem solving, technical skills. Number three. And number four is the calibre of academic results. So I think that kind of information is very useful when academics tell us that they don't want to do any work on graduate attributes because they have to get through the content of the course. Once students have got a habit of mind in terms of learning content, it's more important to be trying to help them to develop these kind of skills. Now, just to come to the last aspect of the storm cloud, which is about disaggregation, this is something that I'm watching with great interest. So Georgia Tech University earlier announced that they were going to partner with Udacity, which is one of the major MOOC providers. And what they've done is they've made their course, their face-to-face master's degree in computer science, which students have been paying $40,000 for. They've put it online. Students can take that for $7,000. So students now have a choice. Do they want to pay $40,000 for an on-campus experience, or do they want to pay $7,000 for an online learning experience? So this is a really significant move, I think, because students are going to be asking, what am I paying $33,000 for? If I can do the same course online, why would I want to pay an extra $33,000 to do a course face-to-face? And that's what inquiry-based learning and Learning 2014 is all about. It's about what is that value add of coming onto campus. Now, we mentioned MOOCs, and this is a fairly recent article. There seems to be two kinds of people: those who say MOOCs will never work because of this, this and this, and people that say there'll only be 10 universities left in the world in the year 2000. So this is a much more measured approach. And they call it a slow tsunami. And I don't know if you've seen the Gartner hype cycle, where you have a trigger of some kind of technology. And I remember in the mid to late 90s when the World Wide Web started to be rolled out and become more common, there were lots of articles about how the World Wide Web was going to mean the end of universities. So there was a trigger of the technology of the web. It led to this peak of inflated expectations where companies around the world, and I did some really interesting case studies at that time, poured millions of dollars into putting their courses online with the expectation that they were going to make a fortune. One of them was called Fathom, disaggregation.com, and it was a collaboration of the University of Chicago, Stanford, the V&A, the British Library, very respectable institutions, and they were all convinced they were going to make a fortune from online education, and it just didn't happen. The students didn't come. That it was expensive, and who wants a degree from fathom.com? They'd much rather have a testament from Stanford. So that led to a trough of disillusionment. But then often the technology just sort of disappears altogether, or we find a way of using the technology in a way that actually works. And I don't often quote Bill Gates, but we always overestimate the change that will occur in the next 2 years and underestimate the change that will happen in the next 10 years. And that really is the history of innovation. I remember seeing a prediction about the fact that in 2 years we'd be able to go, this is in 1900, be able to go to London in 10 days by the year 2000 because of advances in airship technology. So we always either overestimate or underestimate. But I think this is an important one because people have been thinking these changes are going to happen immediately, but they're going to be gradual. Now, Clay Shirley is one of the people on the other side of the debate, and he's a very prominent author in the whole social media area. He's written books like Here Comes Everybody. And he's been saying that MOOCs are a lightning strike on a rotten tree. So we've all been focused on the lightning strike. But the reason that the lightning strike might be successful is because we've got a rotting tree. And he addresses his critics who say that MOOCs will never get anywhere because students want to come to class. They want to have that exciting conversation, that spirited debate in the classroom. But if you really think about it, how often does that really happen? How often do our students sit, just like you are, listening to me? No chance to interrupt, although you can. I'd love to have a spirited debate. Sorry?
You can say I'm not concentrating, but I'm actually tweeting the thought.
What hashtag are you using?
I'm using IRIL and Shirley's hashtag, Shirley's handle.
There you go. So that's one of the things that we need to be doing, is looking at, is our tree rotting? What are the issues? And I'll come back to that in a little while. And so this is what that author predicts, that will actually hit the trough of disillusionment in 2014-15, but that will actually get our act together in terms of MOOCs, and that they'll start to have an impact from 2017 onwards. So we need to be preparing for that, because I think they're right. It's not going to have a big change tomorrow or the next day, but I think MOOCs, there's too much investment, and there are too many signs that these are going to be useful for them to go away. So what we've been doing is preparing for that. And this is the model that I've been in this role now for 6 years, and this is the model that I've been using in all of those 6 years. I keep losing that pointer. So, the most important thing is for us to understand who our learners are. So who are the students that come to UTS? And given that these are our learners, and this is our strategic direction, how should we be designing the curriculum? So focus on the learners and what that means for how we design the curriculum. So given that we've got these students and this curriculum, what does that say about what technologies we should be using and how we should be designing our learning and teaching spaces? And that's the process that we've been using. It's a different process. Other institutions start with the technology and say, well, here's a technology, let's use it because we can. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But I'm a very firm believer in this kind of model. So that leads me into the UTS model of learning, and I'm sure everyone was prepared for AWQA last year, and if I asked you, you could all tell me what the UTS model of learning is. So this is what our curriculum is. And you'll notice that the third dot point is about learning that is research inspired. So it's an integrated exposure to professional practice that is situated in a global workplace, and learning that is research inspired. But what exactly does that mean? Now we've got 4 future teaching learning fellows in the university, and one of them's in the room, Jennifer McDonald. Don't forget any others. Oh, and Anne Gardner, of course. Sorry, Anne. And I've just got a video from one of our fellows, Bronwyn O'Brien, from the Faculty of Science. I'm just going to play you what she says. And bear in mind, just think about that model of disaggregation. Would you be able to get the same experience that Bronwyn describes here if you were one of 2 million people doing an online learning experience? I'm going to go back so that you actually can hear it. Yeah?
Well, I'm looking at harnessing the power of the teaching and research nexus in the development of a research-led immunology curriculum. Now, the whole idea of this is that we almost give our students an apprenticeship in science. We teach them the ethos and the culture of being an immunologist. What does it mean to be an immunologist, and more broadly, a scientist? So we move away from the focus on the acquisition of knowledge, and we explore all of those other very, very important skills and attributes that scientists need right from the day that they graduate. Scientists need to be able to objectively look at what work has been done previously, identify holes in the literature, come up with a research question, and then very objectively address that research question, and look at their data without having blinkers on, and be prepared to critically analyse their own work and have others critically analyse that work as well.
So I think that's a terrific response to what we mean by research-inspired learning, and I think that is going to be a part of that gap between the on-campus but blended experience and entirely online. I'm going to have to skip through a bit of this because I'm running out of time, but we did some work then on what kinds of learning experiences students need to have in order to have this integrated exposure to professional practice. And if you look at the kinds of experiences, they are simulations, role plays, problem-based or issues-based approaches, which links back to this inquiry-based learning, are much more authentic approaches to gaining exposure to professional practice. And of course there are the graduate attributes, so the professional, intellectual and personal attributes, such as ways of generating, critiquing and working with disciplinary and professional knowledge and practice. All of these link in to what it is that you're doing in this group. So what are the learning contexts in which students develop those attributes? So they have to be actively engaged with what and why they are learning, and that's where inquiry-based learning, experiential, creative production, problem posing, peer learning and reflection all come to bear. And it has to be in authenticity, a focus on a diversity of practice contexts, and in informal and formal, online and face-to-face. So given this is what we want students to be doing as they learn, what does that mean for everything else that we do? So this is where I coined the term Learning 2014, and in retrospect, it wasn't a great choice, but I'll give you my rationale for coming up with this. When you talk to most people about student learning, they talk in terms of teaching. And I read a lot of grant applications, a lot of promotion applications, and almost always I read the sentences like, I am student focused, I'm not teacher focused, and I put the student at the centre. And then you never hear student or learning again. It's all about teaching what the teacher does. So what I'm trying to do is change the conversation away from teaching towards learning. So that's why it has learning in there. I put 2014 because it's next year that we're moving into the 3 new buildings. So we have to be prepared for the new spaces that have been developed to support the kinds of learning that I've just been talking about. Because this is what Learning 2014 is going to look like. So I just wanted to break that down in terms of what exactly it is that students need to do when they learn. So hopefully they come with some learning goals, and there may actually be some questions that they come into learning with, especially if they're undertaking an inquiry-based learning approach. And one of the major roles of the teacher is to say, when students come onto campus, what is the most valuable thing for them to do? So students make an enormous investment in coming onto campus. So it's our role to make sure that they have the best possible experience, given they've spent 2 hours in travelling here and then 2 hours travelling home. Big investment for students. So what kind of experience do the students need to have to give them the best, most high quality learning experience? So is it a simulation? Is it a debate? Is it an experiment? But then what can they do before they come to prepare them? So instead of coming here to hear a lecture, they listen to all of that first via YouTube, via TED, or using some kinds of open education resources. So that's the whole concept of, or it's a part of the concept of flipped learning. It's about preparing them for a really good, interactive, engaging experience once they're on campus. And then they engage in that large collaborative experience. So having gained access to that, they then need to do something more in order to understand that content. So they might do an experiment, but not necessarily in a laboratory. It can be any kind of experiment. They might talk to a mentor, a learning mentor. They might go out into industry to try something out. And they might travel. We think travel is a great experience for students to have. But any kind of action without feedback is not terribly useful. So we have to find ways of ensuring that they get feedback. And that might be through group work. It might be face-to-face, or it might be online. It might be discussing one-on-one with another student or with an academic. It might be using Facebook. It might be using Twitter. There's some great debates happen over Twitter. And then finally, they need to be able to reflect. So what was it? What was their initial goal? What was the question they were trying to solve? What did they do? What was the feedback, and how does that change the way they understand that? So that's essentially what Learning 2014 is. So they're thinking, they might be writing a blog, they might be writing an assignment, a reflective piece. So that's what Learning 2014 is. If you were to draw what learning was when I went to university, and I have to tell this story, I did IT in my undergraduate degree, IT and statistics. I did a subject called database design. I walked in on the hour, the lecturer walked in, opened his textbook at the bookmark, and he read to us for 50 minutes from the textbook. after 50 minutes, put their bookmark back in and walked out. Now, the amazing thing about that story is that I kept going. Linda was actually in one of my classes, and because I could read, so why did I go every week? I just really was young and didn't realise that I could actually just stay home and read the textbook. Anyway, so learning has changed.
Value of the flipped classroom is different in different contexts. But here in UTS, I teach in a business school in the large core subject with first year students. So we have about 1,600 students in the first semester intake. Large lecture theatres don't tend to engage 18-year-olds in the same way that they may have traditionally. 18-year-olds are used to technology, they use it in their everyday lives. And so what we're looking for in the flipped classroom approach is how to use technology to better aid the learning of that particular cohort of students. The idea of the flipped classroom is that students can access the materials that are relevant on that particular topic prior to coming to university, so that university does become a place for discussion and dialogue and for practicing the skills that we hope that they'll have when they graduate in about 3 years' time.
That's Mel Edwards, who's the 4th Teaching and Learning Fellow, and she's in the Faculty of Business, just showing that flipped learning, which is what we were talking about, is possible. Les must be standing up because my time's up. So we're also using remote laboratories, simulations in health, peer learning and group work. So in terms of the way we're designing the campus to make sure that UTS is well prepared for the future, we've been doing refurbishments of spaces to provide the learning spaces that match up with the curriculum. If we want students to use group work, where are they going to go and do it? So these are some of the spaces that we've been gradually rolling out across the university. But we've also been doing evaluations of those spaces to inform the design of the new building, so the Geary Design Building and the Engineering and IT Building. So this room is an example of one of those. So this room is designed so that when students do come together, they don't just sit and listen, they actually work in groups on activities. So in the new buildings, there is not a single standard lecture theatre. All of the large spaces are like this. And so my closing statement is that any university that can be replaced by a MOOC should be. And that's why the inquiry-based learning is so important, because it really adds that value, the difference between a $7,000 degree and a $40,000 degree. So thank you.
Does anybody have a question? David, you've got a question for Shirley.
It's really about, when you showed that graph and number 4 was calibre of academic results, I've made this more of a comment or just a challenge or something. I wonder whether it also suggests that currently the result is a number and a letter. Maybe
Which graph was calibre of academic results?
the table with the things that employers look for.
Oh yes, yeah.
I kind of wonder, at the moment, academic results is a number and a letter. And I wonder whether we really got to go right back and say the way we present an academic transcript is one which provides not just a number and a letter, but identifies and quantifies or gives an assessment of those graduate attributes and captures that. And I know that sounds like a lot of extra spreadsheets and a lot of extra thinking. I just wonder, then we have a better, then that's what those academic results should be like, not just a number and a letter.
Yeah, I think that's exactly on the right track. The problem is that we're not very good at the moment of assessing in an objective way things like, well, I guess we can to some extent in terms of communication, but attitudes, those kinds of things are what employers are looking for. They're looking for a particular kind of personality is resilient and able to take knocks. So I don't know how we actually build that in, but ideally we would, because when students go here all the time about, and Jo McKenzie gives a great example of someone that she knows that applied for exactly the same job that she had about 30 years ago. Jo went for a 1-hour interview this person went for a one-day session where they had to engage in teamwork and to give presentations. So the employers were watching all the time how that person was engaging with others, how they were dealing with conflict, how they were dealing with uncertainty in terms of an ill-defined problem, all of those kinds of issues. So that's something that we maybe have to get better at. That's a good point.
Yeah, I'm conscious of time. Can we take you first?
Okay.
Sorry, Janet.
Do you think there's a risk, especially in the early stages of the university, that students themselves won't be equipped or understand the basis for this type of learning and actually have a detrimental effect where they stop doing it?
Excellent question. I didn't go on to show you the Learning 2020 slide because what we actually have to change a whole range of systems in the university if we're going to succeed with Learning 2014. I've got a whole range of projects going on, including things like, are we giving academics the correct names? If we're trying to discourage lectures as the main form, I'm saying main, form of students' learning, why do we still call people lecturers and senior lecturers? Why do we privilege the lecture by paying casual staff 4 times the hourly rate than if they were, and there's workload policies. I keep hearing horror stories of people who've converted their subject to more collaborative learning. The head of school finds out and gives them extra lectures to do. So there's all of that, but the major project there is really about how we prepare students for new forms of learning. I did a major national study at the end of 1990 and was looking at someone else's project, really innovative approach. Everything I read looked fantastic. I went to interview the students. They said, we hate this subject. We hate it so much we're getting up a petition to the Vice-Chancellor because he's just lazy and not doing his work properly, making us do all that work. And so you can't introduce these new approaches without preparing the students for it. And it actually taught me, I learned a good lesson from that because I was teaching at that time and I was using quite different approaches. So I took up the first lesson, or an hour of the first lesson, just talking about approaches to learning. But I'm out of time, so I won't expand.
I know Jen has been listening.
I'm just wondering if we've got a program like first year for last year, so that they are better equipped to get jobs, communicate, do interviews and be real life ready.
Well, I'll tell you, how long have I got?
30 seconds.
30 seconds. What I'm trying to do is, if you look at some of the research, it shows that when students come onto campus and enrol, go to orientation, 80% of their identity is their pre-enrollment identity. And it takes them about a year to develop an identity as a university student, and it's only by the end of their degree that about 80% is in their professional identity. And so what I'm trying to do is turn that around and try to help students to begin with the end in mind. So start to see themselves straight away, and I know you do this in your teaching, but you're one of the small number of people that does this. So when we bring students in, they first of all start to think about what kind of skills they're going to need to have, what do employers value, and it will be things like group work, teamwork, capacity for critical thinking, working alone, and then we can link it to some of the new approaches to teaching. That's the very short answer.
Stop.
Shirley, can we thank Shirley for a fantastic talk?